if you're anything like me, Zoey101 was a big part of your childhood. Except it wasn't, because I just watched the first season of Zoey101 at age 35, at age 50, at Korean age 25. But if you grew up watching American TV as a kid anytime between like 2000 and 2015, I'm sure you saw something that was in the same vein as Zoey101, whether that was Drake and Josh, iCarly, The Amanda Show, Victorious. All these shows had a certain similar aura to them, and that's because they were all on Nickelodeon, and they were all created, produced, and written by the same guy. I am going to get into some of the surreal things that you pick up on when you watch this show as an adult, and how TV generally is brainwashing us and ruining the world or whatever. But first, I'm going to give my impressions on the show, as I literally knew nothing about this show, Zoey101, besides that there was someone named Zoey in it, up until a few weeks ago. The basic premise is that we follow the life of Zoey Brooks, who is transferring to the school Pacific Coast Academy. It's like a boarding school type get-up, I guess, because everyone seems to be in middle school or early high school, but they live on campus and have roommates as if they were at university. And as if the show didn't feel enough like pseudo-college from all the party scenes with soda cans being thrown around like beer, they literally shot the show at an actual university's campus. So there you go. But the big twist which they throw at you in the pilot is that PCA used to be an all-boys school, and this is the first year that they're going to allow girls to attend. But quintessentially, this show is a generic sitcom, at least in this first season. You have a recurring cast of characters, each with a clear identity, and they deal with what is almost always a totally unrealistic premise for people that are supposed to be in, like, 8th grade.
How cool is it that we have our own sushi bar right on campus?
But hey, I get it, they're trying to make exciting television. And so the main characters of the show are pretty much just Zoey, her roommates, along with the first person Zoey meets on campus, Chase, and Chase's roommates. Chase is the first person from PCA we really get to meet. He's the main male character in the show, and he plays his part well, I guess. I just can't get over this guy's fucking bizarre neck posture. This is one of those things that you can't unsee once you pick up on it, and in every freaking episode, Chase has this body language like he's staring at the floor, even when he's talking to people, and sometimes he just is staring at the floor. So most normal people create a perpendicular angle between the floor and their face, and this dude Chase is just constantly staring up at the ceiling to compensate for his craned neck permabow. And literally try this at home and see how fun it is to have your eyebrows take up like 25% of your vision. And so as I progressed through the season, it actually got increasingly harder for me to tell if this weird head posture thing was like the actor kid himself, if that's just how he actually is in real life, or if he was told to be this way for the show. Somebody said on day one, like, hey, look down a bit, put your head down, it'll make you seem more timid, and he just happened to follow that advice to a T. Chase isn't awkward enough to be the laughingstock of the show, but he also isn't cool enough to be easily championed by the audience. You kind of want him to do well and grow as a character, but his obvious feelings towards Zoey, and more specifically his uncool ways of handling those feelings, make you wonder if he's too neurotic for someone as grounded as Zoey. Zoey is definitely the most ethical and mature character in the show. Even in spite of her being new on campus, she quickly becomes a trusted moral authority for the other girls, and eventually it seems like the whole campus knows Zoey and will look to her for assistance in uneasy situations. The only lessons she really has to learn as a character in the season are about understanding when to take her hands off of a circumstance so that she can let other people fight their own battles, even if they're not very good at it. She's also a little too talented at everything she does, which might make her more like a role model than someone to relate to for the average 10-year-old viewer.
You can't go around taping people's private conversations.
Dustin is Zoey's younger brother, and he's the most Christ-like character on the show, who almost seems to exist just to suffer. He usually handles the torment with a good attitude, but doesn't seem to serve much function besides comedic relief and giving Zoey someone to exert her motherly energy towards. Dustin kind of goes back and forth between being just a bit likable and just a bit annoying. It starts to get pretty predictable when he continuously gets the short end of the stick, yet at the same time I found that my least favorite episodes tended to be the ones that Dustin wasn't in at all. If you have to give the crown to someone, Dustin is absolutely the sigma male of the Zoey101 Season 1 cast. This dude is an academic prodigy. Yet he seems more adventurous and open to risky or unclear pursuits than anyone else on the show. He's always a lone wolf. Like, where the hell are Dustin's friends supposed to be? He doesn't even have one of those extras who just stands in the frame beside him. Does Dustin even have friends? Or roommates? It's really clear who Chase's friends and roommates are. And speaking of, Chase's first right-hand man is Michael. And Michael is the type of guy who's going to get invited to every social function, every party, you name it. But given the right circumstances, he's also the type of guy that would end up being complicit in a murder or human trafficking case, or something crazy like that. Because he's the type of guy who doesn't know when to drop the good vibes when things are actually going too far. He always has this relentless, happy-go-lucky demeanor. And maybe that's just like how his dad is when his mom is having histrionic meltdowns.
What did I do wrong?
Also, I didn't even want to bring it up, but it just kept being alluded to that Michael is gay. And not really in a serious way, but in a way that seems like a joke. And you're not really sure why half the time. Like, even for 2005 TV, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be like, haha, he's gay. Or be like, haha, Michael is so funny when he jokes about being gay.
I don't know, man, Dave. The quarterback's a pretty handsome dude.
Anyway, the final component of these Three Musketeers is Logan. And Logan is that guy who just constantly expresses how much he would love to tap that in this transitory age where some kids are still figuring that shit out. And it gives Logan a strange power edge against everyone else that he's so outspoken and assertive in his pubescent heterosexual disposition. They really try to paint Logan as a jerk in these first few episodes. I would say in the first one he's mainly just guilty of competitive trash talk, though we later see that he does go hypermasculine full mode invasive by planting a spy camera in the girls' lounge, probably not the best move. But after that, he doesn't really do anything to deserve the title of the bad bully, in my opinion, but it just seems like you're expected to hate him as the viewer. The girls still seem to hate him, and I guess that's warranted. Although Logan essentially redeems himself by sticking his neck out for the girls not long after the spy camera incident. But as the episodes went on, especially when Chase started to pull lots of mousy antics instead of taking the initiative to be direct and honest with people, I started to find Logan more likable than Chase, despite him obviously not being the intended male lead. Logan's critical flaw is definitely his narcissism, but that also makes him unmistakably direct and honest, which starts to seem like a positive attribute that the other characters are often lacking.
Incoming!
As for Zoe's roommates, you have Nicole, who's portrayed as the stereotypical dumb, girly girl. But as time went on, I started to see that she's really just a very naive person more so than a stupid person, despite the dialogue often framing her as the latter. She generally has a positive attitude, which makes her more likable than Zoe's other roommate, but Nicole is obviously lacking some maturity. I feel like this type of girl was usually just girly and gossipy enough to kick it with the cool kids crowd, but even if they avoided getting picked on in middle school, they get picked on by life when the growing pains of fitting into a cynical adult world kick in. And then there's that other roommate, Dana, who's just irritable and disagreeable all the time for no clear reason, and that's her only role in the show at this point, so it doesn't really feel like she has a personality. I was really hoping she would have some moments where the audience could start caring about her more, but she's really in the background for most of the season. It also seems like her and Logan would have made a good couple because they're both the baddies, but even when that was hinted at, they made sure that Dana maintained her character of taking digs at people and then running away. And last but not least, you have the Sigma female, Quinn. That is a very zany character that feels completely impossible. You might occasionally meet a manic know-it-all type girl in school, but this mad science tomfoolery is just exaggerated to ridiculously supernatural heights with Quinn. Whether intended or not, her character is just there to teach the children watching to be distrustful of experimentation and to silence the voice of curiosity inside themselves. Oh man, making thoughtful consideration a weirdo trait is the worst psyop, best psyop, worst psyop of all time. At least Chase still has some curiousness.
I wonder who invented the meatball.
Also, this girl gets so much screen time, it's crazy. They almost could call this the Zoe and Quinn show, because every single episode, Quinn has some crazy side plot with one of her mad science inventions, and half the time it doesn't even connect to the main story of the episode in any meaningful way. Zoey101 is a time capsule of the American ideal, It's the prelude of consumerist optimism before the subprime mortgage crisis. The zeitgeist of 2000s mall-core adolescence. Actually, Zoey101 is none of those things. Zoey101 is merely the creation of Dan Schneider, Bill O'Dowd, Jan Corblin, Joe Catan. The whole thing just screams LA. It screams rich people in LA. It screams rich LA TV producers. It screams rich LA TV producers with And don't get me wrong, I love LA in parts. I love rich people. I love TV producers. And I love feet. But just not all at the same time. It is pretty impossible to watch a show like this as an adult without constantly being reminded that this is a production. You never see a boom mic fall into frame or someone forget their line, but the way this kind of show is written has that same effect. And I get it. They made it for kids, not for adults. But kids become adults. And just because kids won't be able to detect that clunkiness, and they're going to be more willing to accept whatever actors do on a screen as normal, doesn't mean they don't deserve better. From a strictly creative perspective, I'll give the people behind these kinds of shows a pass. It's not a modern-day Hamlet, but of course it was never supposed to be. So where I take issue is that I think anyone who makes media for a youth audience should consider that responsibility something to take very seriously. Because kids don't have the wherewithal to know what is and isn't normal on a TV show. Of course, on a very basic level, children quickly understand that TV shows are fictional and by design, but children are still in a phase of learning by immersion. And they're going to unconsciously, quote-unquote, learn things from the TV show as if they are learning things from the quote-unquote real world. Because they can be just as easily immersed in the TV show as they can be immersed in the real world. And Zoey101 resembles some kind of plastic emulation of reality as much as it may resemble the actual thing. It's kind of crazy how much an entire generation of kids' humor was probably shaped by stuff that was said by kids on TV shows who were just reciting lines written by 35-year-olds who live in one of the most plasticky, half-real microcosms in the world. Compared to a full-length film that is targeted at children, most of the weird potential indoctrination is in the dialogue style between the characters, as there really isn't much time in a 20-minute episode to build a memorable allegoric narrative. And maybe there is enough time, but I just don't think these writers concern themselves with there being a message to each episode. It seemed like the most important thing was to just give the characters a platform to define each other. So, yes, Zoey101 is a mood piece. And that mood is completely driven by the show's music. This upbeat, positive, commercial pop rock sound that is almost constantly filling the background. I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing because this show was obviously made in the 2000s and that's given away by all kinds of other things, but the music definitely does help to date it. I wonder what kind of soundtrack a show like this would have nowadays.
Guys, stop, get up, come on. What is going on here?
He said that I had bushy hair.
With all that being said, I've done my best to try to summarize the message of each episode. In the pilot, we learned that girls can play basketball too. Actually, the girls' team was really struggling, and I was kind of wondering why everyone on the show so far had to be some stereotypical girly girl who was inept with sports. We all remember those elite few girls who were super athletic and would be at the front of the pack when it came to running the mile or whatever, and so it turns out that Dana is one of those girls. In episode 2, we see that living with other people, especially for the first time, requires a concerted effort to communicate effectively with each other. Also, Chase gets soft friend-zoned for the first and not final time. Episode 3 tells us that payback's a bitch, and Edward Snowden was right.
Zoom in.
Okay, hang on. This is great.
4. Be wary about who you make look stupid. Breaking rules is okay as long as it involves rescuing a cute doggo. Also, we solidify the trope that adults only exist in this universe to help facilitate or fall victim to complexly orchestrated practical jokes. Number 5. When one person martyrs themselves to bear an undeserved punishment, you can work in numbers to completely neutralize the punishment system by unanimously defying it. Okay, wow, that actually seems like a pretty lethal one. It's a shame real adult humans seem too cowardly in our current era to ever do something like that. Number 6. It doesn't matter how much cash and flash you throw at your project if it has no soul. Also, you need drip because you are your drip. Episode 7, Germ Theory is real. Be sure to ask a girl if you can kiss her before you do so. On to number 8, we see that lying can cause lots of problems, even if it is to protect someone's feelings. Because it's gonna catch up to you and get you in all kinds of trouble. Except sometimes everything works out anyway and only the prop character loses. How about that? Number 9, it's important to try your best for your goals even if they seem unattainable, because you never know when some mysteriously wealthy punk rock prince will suddenly appear and hand you $1,000. Which I guess was oddly prophetic. And don't forget that dancing is embarrassing. And Drake Bell, now known as Drake Campagna, handles counterfeit merchandising in an extremely low-key cool way. In episode 10, we see that Zoey is a talented inventor or artist or something, and even if her work is culturally appropriated by an older kid who could probably overpower her both physically and mentally, she comes out on top because her invention artistry is just that fucking good. And don't copy someone else's genius and try to pass it off as your own work. That never works, right? And if you do, you're gonna end up riding your mangled seat bicycle home in pain. Okay, look, I'm not gonna say there was anything too obvious, but if I happened to be a huge pervert who happened to write this show, I might write some moments into the show like this. Number 11. Be sure to include your friends. Cardio is bullshit. In episode 12, the students take personality tests to get matched with a date for a school dance, and yet again, Chase fails to just tell Zoey he likes her and has a strange, squirmy, nice guy approach that probably doesn't really accomplish anything in the end. Also, it seems like everyone who got screwed over in this episode tried too much to tamper with the future and probably forgot that fate is the homie. In the season finale, Zoey is again showing her single flaw of being too giving, as she is basically asked by everyone in the school to help them study for their finals. By the way, do you guys know what this is about? To the people who asked other people to help them study for finals, do you just get lonely studying? Or do you don't understand the material? Do you just not know how to study, so you need someone else to hold your hand? Or is it just a euphemism for hanging out? I seriously don't get this. Let me know. Anyway, the whole class is supposed to go to a beach party to celebrate, but the main cast misses the bus and winds up at the wrong beach, and they decide to party without the rest of the school. They're picked up by a teacher, and the episode ends in a sedated haze that feels like some kind of psychological warfare, telling you to close your eyes and submit. Pretty much every episode has really obvious foreshadowing.
Hey, wait a minute, is there a camera in there? I wonder if this extra footage will come in handy later.
And sometimes, every once in a while, that parallelism that connects the beginning of the episode to the end is actually unpredictable. Or at least not so predictable that a conspicuous setup gives it away at the very beginning of the episode. A lot of times these moments are just there to prime you for a euphoric celebration montage to close the episode. And they're probably pretty stirring for a child.
Hey!
I want to really emphasize that you don't get how weird and unnatural the dialogue and behavior is in these kids shows when you're a kid. Because you don't have a very good reference for what is normal, and so you're not really able to see past the veil of the show and feel the strange preconceptions of the writers bleeding through the screen. I had a friend in elementary school who literally acted as if he was someone like Quinn. He had random computer parts in his backpack, he'd make up long technological jargon that no one could understand. He would steal hair from his crush so that he could allegedly clone her. He'd hold up random electronics to the sky during recess and say that he was making contact with military Black Project satellites. And this dude never broke character. So if anything now, I just hope he doesn't look back too shamefully on those times. Because at some point, I'm sure every one of us did or said something pretty stupid that was influenced by a character from a TV show. And it's easy to shrug off this stuff because everyone grows up and stops pretending they can clone people with a strand of hair. So what's the harm? The thing is, there's an abundance of much more subtle messaging that's not so obvious in its errors. And it might even touch on topics we still struggle to find certainty about as adults. as most of us had imperfect role models or grew up in dysfunctional families who taught us very lazily about how to create a moral and good life. How should you resolve conflict? How should you deliver unfortunate news? How should you interact with the opposite sex? How should you court the opposite sex? How should you make friends? Handle an uncomfortable moment in a conversation? Are you even considering if it is worth acting on your impulses, or where they even come from? Or are you just trying to figure out what the best way to act on them is? The list can go on endlessly. Even the most well-adjusted people usually feel at best okay about how to answer these kind of questions. And most people are close to having no conscious idea and just live their life on an autopilot that was carved out for them by their peers from a young age. Something that gave them a habitual way to behave that might not be excellent, but is good enough for them to avoid any significant trouble. If everyone had excellent approaches to those aforementioned questions, the world would be a lot less chaotic, anxious, depressed, confused, etc. And of course, the unspoken answers Zoey101 tells us about these kind of questions usually aren't very good. The real saving grace of the show is that the lead female role model, Zoe, is a pretty well put together person for her age. She's certainly the most level-headed on the show, and generally takes a very considerate and moral approach to whatever problems are at hand. She's eager to take the fall for her friends and help them when they need it. She just needs to be careful who she gives that energy to, especially as she gets older, as these types of people can often attract fuck-ups who will depend on her to repeatedly put them back together again. And so a lot of the important moments in this first season are learning experiences for Zoe on where to set her boundaries. I commend Zoe for being flexible in challenging circumstances, and willing to change her situation when others show a lack of appreciation for her good nature. We see this early on when she decides to move out of her room with Nicole and Dana, after being scapegoated by Nicole and Dana for creating the discordance in their living situation. This kind of behavior is really important for Zoe, who exemplifies a respect for her own value by shutting the door on potentially immoral and destructive people, but it is just as important for Nicole and Dana that Zoe acted in a way that established what Nicole and Dana did was wrong, because it forces Nicole and Dana to come to terms with their shortcomings. If Zoe was a more passive person who was afraid to rock the boat, she would have enabled Nicole and Dana by acting aloof and not creating any kind of consequence for their accusation. Zoe also tends to stick up for herself in a way that doesn't seem mean. She is firm and clear in her message when she points out something that seems off, but doesn't do so with a tone of vitriol. And this reflects well on her parents. It tells you that Zoe grew up in a household where firmness and disagreement were expressed very healthily and appropriately by her parents. It was probably an environment that welcomed critical and open discussion, where counterpoints were not used as a disavowal of character, but rather as a tool for the exploration of truth and wisdom. So where the hell is all of this put-togetherness with Dustin? Not that Dustin seems distinctly lacking in character, but it makes you wonder, what happened there? Where is that strong virtuousness that we see in his sister? Zoey101 will definitely make you meditate on your youth, and think about that age of being in middle school or just barely a freshman in high school. It's that particular age where everyone still has a healthy-looking face. It is before the era of acne, but more importantly, you're just not that worn down yet. No one has years of drinking or smoking under their belt, and whatever junk food or other crap they have been putting in their body hasn't really been taking its toll yet. There's still a mystery to the world at that age, of who you will become, of a life after schooling, if that day ever comes. There's still a mystery of what your days in school will come to mean.